Over this past year, we've seen many people on the right protesting the COVID restrictions. Conservatives have been calling for a more surgical approach to dealing with COVID, especially after we learned the lockdown seemed not to be working, or at least not working in the way we hoped they were. Trump had long said that the cure can't be worse than the disease. So, in what can only be described as a remarkable coincidence, across this country, the United States, COVID restrictions are being eased, perfectly timed with Joe Biden becoming president. Now, maybe it's just a coincidence. There are probably some other political reasons why this might be happening, particularly in California, but we'll get to that. You see, in many other countries, the restrictions aren't being lifted. There's going to be a referendum in Switzerland in June to determine if they should lift their COVID restrictions. And in many countries, the restrictions are so severe, riots have been erupting. In fact, across Europe, there have been riots all throughout this past year. Just in the past week, in Tunisia, for instance, North Africa, not Europe, about 600 or so people were arrested. We're now learning that in Australia, people are being arrested for defying COVID lockdowns at a more lefty protest. And in the Netherlands, it's gotten so bad that a Dutch mayor has said we are on our way to civil war. In a third night of violent riots with 180 people arrested, things seem to be getting worse, destroying your country's economy. It was obvious what was going to happen. We saw the yellow vests protest in France. That started when Emmanuel Macron was like, we're going to raise the tax a little bit on petrol because climate change and all that. Well, regular people couldn't afford the bill anymore, and they snapped. We saw protests and riots for over a year. What did you think was going to happen when you came out and specifically said we are destroying the economy? Now, I understand. A pandemic is serious business, no doubt. But that's why so many people have been saying we must balance saving the economy, which is our ability to work and provide for ourselves, while also protecting the vulnerable. In the U.S., well, some states did this. Some states didn't. In Europe, it's been fairly draconian, and many on the left have been cheering for it. I do find it kind of strange that we have, for instance, in Australia, leftists protesting, defying the COVID restrictions and then getting arrested for it. In the U.S., much the same with Black Lives Matter, yet they're the ones leading the charge for the lockdowns and then reaping what they have sown. I can only imagine that if we do not lift these restrictions, if Europe doesn't, then we'll see much of the same thing. Now, for the U.S., we are seeing the restrictions finally starting to get lifted. Many conservatives say this is pure politics. Now that Joe Biden is the president, they got nothing to worry about. Okay, open things back up. Well, at least for California, it seems like this may be due to 1.2 million people signing a recall petition for Gavin Newsom. So he seems to be panicking. We'll see how that plays out. We'll read all that news. But let's start with the big and first and most important story, the riots that are erupting in the Netherlands. Before we get started, make sure you head over to timcast.com and become a member to help support our work. There's some serious considerations about getting banned. And we've seen the great purge happening recently. Every day we see more and more people losing followers as tens of thousands of people are wiped out. And a lot of people keep saying to me, Tim, you're never going to get banned. Well, that's not true. Facebook has officially, I should say Facebook has restricted my page where I post my videos. They've given me no recourse, explained nothing, and there's nothing I can do about it. I don't know why. People say I'm fairly milquetoast. I'm a fence sitter. Doesn't matter. Facebook still took my page down, effectively shutting it down. Oh, I can still post, but it's pointless because it doesn't go anywhere. Go to timcast.com, become a member, and you'll get access to a bunch of members-only posts because for the Timcast IRL podcast, we are doing a ton of behind-the-scenes content and members-only content where we'll do podcast episodes, and we say things that we can't say on social media, and you can get that there by becoming a member. Email members at timcast.com if you have any issues. But let's get back to the main story. Dutch mayor warns the country is heading for civil war following violent anti-curfew protests as France and Italy admit they're facing another COVID-19 lockdown. You see, here in the U.S., we're kind of easing things. In Europe, it's only going to get worse. They say Europe's battle against coronavirus entered a dangerous new phase this week as politicians push to tighten lockdown measures across the continent, even after a weekend of rioting brought scenes of chaos to the Netherlands and Denmark amid warnings of civil war. France is due to decide whether to bring in a third national lockdown this week, as Prime Minister Jean Castex warned the situation there is worrying, with Italy's top medic also calling for months-long national shutdown. This is despite Jan Joritsma, mayor of Eindhoven, which was hit by its worst riots in almost 4 decades at the weekend, warning, quote, "We are on our way to civil war," after new nationwide curfew measures sparked public outcry. Meanwhile, hopes that vaccines might provide a quick way out of the crisis all but faded after France's Pasteur Institute was forced to scrap a jab it had been developing with U.S. drug maker Merck because it didn't work. The news came as AstraZeneca, whose jab has yet to be approved by EU regulators, announced it was cutting vaccine supplies to the continent by up to 60% because of problems with supply chains, thought to be due to underproduction at a factory in Belgium. You see the problem here? Did you think about what 2 plus 2 would equal? It would equal 4. What I mean by that, when you shut down your economy and you restrict your manufacturing, don't be surprised then when you can't make the vaccine you need to fix everything. Sometimes we can't control nature. They're going to say head of the EU executive Ursula von der Leyen had a call with the firm on Monday to remind them of their commitments. But EU President Charles Michel admitted that vaccinating 70% of Europe's population, the figure theoretically needed to ensure herd immunity by the end of the summer, as planned, will now be difficult. I'll tell you the other problem with the herd immunity attempts. They've been telling us for the past few months the vaccine will not stop infection. It stops you from developing symptoms of the disease, which means herd immunity will not happen. Oh, look, there's always got to be some light at the end of the tunnel, I'm sure. But if you're telling people that they can still catch it and they can still spread it, then this thing is going far and wide and it's going to impact everybody. At a certain point, you're going to see riots because people are going to start to realize there's no solution in sight. There's no light at the end of the tunnel, and they're going to snap. They go on to say Europe, which was initially praised for its tough response to COVID after most countries went into full lockdowns in March last year, has been hammered by a second wave that a mishmash of measures has largely failed to control. Those efforts have been complicated by the emergence of new and potentially more infectious variants of the virus, including in the hard-hit UK, which is now back in full lockdown. While many countries have announced new measures to try and bring infections down, case numbers have remained stubbornly high in countries such as France, Italy, and Germany, causing hospitals to run out of space. Meanwhile, Spain and Portugal have both seen infections soar to record levels after a brief dip over the festive period, putting health services under strain. The Netherlands, which has become one of Europe's worst affected countries with its light touch lockdown approach, has seen cases fall dramatically in January, but remain well above the lows seen during the summer. As a result, and amid fears the UK variant could cause cases to spike, new measures designed to bring the toll down were announced last week, including a 9 p.m. to 4:30 a.m. curfew, the country's first since World War II. This prompted protests in 10 cities on Sunday, which turned violent as protesters fought police, looted shops, and trashed police stations. Authorities in Eindhoven announced on Monday that 62 people had been arrested and more are being sought, while officers in Amsterdam said 192 were arrested. It is unacceptable, Prime Minister Mark Rutte said. This has nothing to do with protesting. This is criminal violence, and that's how we'll treat it. My city is crying, and so am I, Eindhoven Mayor Jan Joritsma told media Sunday night. In an emotional, impromptu press conference, he called the rioters the scum of the earth and added, "I am afraid that if we continue down this path, we are on our way to civil war." How disgusting. Look, for the most part, we talk about the United States. Foreign policy to me is a big issue, but think about this. In a European city, you have people who don't want their lives destroyed, who believe in individual rights to a certain extent, because mind you, Europe's pretty far left compared to us. And they're being called the scum of the earth. Listen, that's pretty bold. Maybe I've had some strong words for Antifa in the past, and if that's the case, let me walk that back. I think Antifa is bad. I think they're crazy. I think they're poorly misguided and violent. And some of the people who lead the charge, I believe, are evil and are scum. But just calling all of the rioters that, look, I've talked about when we see these Black Lives Matter riots, I understand where their anger is coming from. Absolutely. It's wrong, though, to hurt innocent people over this. Right now, what we're seeing is not too dissimilar. Oppression from the authority over people who just want to live their lives. And they're rioting. Guess what? I think the rioting is wrong. The violence, the destruction is wrong. But I understand their anger, and I don't think this is the way. But man, to call the people that you are beating down the scum of the earth is impressive nonetheless. Hubert Broles, mayor of the city of Nijmegen, I'm pronouncing these names wrong, trust me, and leader of a group of local security organizations added, these demonstrations are being hijacked by people who only want one thing, and that is to riot. Now, it may be the case. It may be that there are real working class people who want to peacefully protest in defiance of these restrictions, and you're getting the Antifa lunatic types coming out and rioting. I think the rioting's always wrong. I think it hurts your message. But at a certain point, the system is only retained by the confidence of the people. And if the people have lost confidence and you can't control them, well, then you're in trouble, aren't you? The same is true for us here in the United States. They say in France, where fears about the UK variant are also prevalent, new border controls came into force on Sunday amid fears that a third nationwide lockdown could be on the cards later this week. Government spokesman Gabriel Attal told the France 3 broadcaster that all scenarios are on the table, adding the next few days will be decisive. Some doctors, meanwhile, said that a lockdown was all but inevitable. We're moving towards a lockdown, said Denis Malvy, a member of France's Scientific Council and head of the Infectious Diseases Department in a Bordeaux hospital. In Italy, Professor Walter Ricciardi, advisor to the Minister of Health, used an appearance on radio to call for another 4-week national shutdown, saying it is necessary to bring cases down, warning that Italy's current measures will be enough to flatten the number of cases, but not decrease them. He added, we need a real lockdown of 3 or 4 weeks, then resume tracing and testing. Only in this way can we recover normality that we lack. Meanwhile, the EU recommended cutting off all but essential travel to areas deemed to be infection hotspots with 500 or more cases per 100,000 people, and was due to publish a map later this week outlining where they are. EU Justice Commissioner Didier Reynders said that between 10 and 20 EU countries would see all or part of their territory deemed to be a high infection zone if the map was published today. What I find really interesting here is that there were a lot of people saying that one day COVID was just going to disappear. Trump was saying it. A lot of people thought it was political. Maybe. No, I mean, honestly, COVID was really bad for Trump. And I think COVID and Trump's handling of it is what cost him the election. I think Trump did a fairly good job in handling COVID, and the left immediately recoils in horror. But the issue is, we were told the death rate would be substantially higher. It was substantially lower than projected. And we have no metric by which to judge Trump anyway. So what am I supposed to say? He called for a travel ban. Joe Biden said it was wrong. Now Joe Biden's instituting that travel ban. So, okay. Now, okay, fine. Donald Trump's not president anymore. I guess we can slowly move on from him. But I do think it's fair to say we still get a few weeks to talk about this transition period comparing Biden to Trump. I think that's acceptable. Now, take a look at this. The Wall Street Journal, Switzerland to hold referendum on COVID-19 lockdown. The vote, which could be held as soon as June, tests government's legal powers and is latest example of Switzerland's direct democracy. June. They're locked down. They're locking down harder. So you might think it's all going to go away at some point. But listen, in the United States, I think the reality is the lockdowns are being eased because these people never cared in the first place. Now that there's no risk to Joe Biden, they don't care if you get sick. I think when it was Trump, they were like, I'm not taking responsibility for this. And now that Biden's in, they're like, Biden can take responsibility for this. I don't care. We got 4 years. People forget all of this. Take a look at Trump's 4 years. People forget that 2019 was one of the best economic years people have ever had or seen in their lifetimes. And then 2020 was miserable. And I can't remember who said it. Maybe it was Karl Rove, that a year is an eternity in politics. So they didn't care to do anything for the first 3 years. All that mattered was 2020. Get people mad now. Okay. Well, what's happening in Europe? For that matter, what's happening around the world? Take a look at this story from just the other day. Ultra-Orthodox rioters clash with police as some schools flout virus lockdown. Clashes broke out Sunday morning in 3 cities across Israel as police attempted to enforce COVID lockdown restrictions in a number of ultra-Orthodox communities. In the Jerusalem neighborhood of Mea Sherim, I hope I'm pronouncing it right, Sherim, Hundreds of people clashed with police attempting to shut down a yeshiva that had opened illegally. Police said that officers who arrived at the yeshiva or religious seminary were quickly surrounded by a crowd shouting insults at them and throwing trash and other debris in their direction. We saw what happened in Tunisia. Over 600 people arrested. The army was deployed. Whatever is going on, it is not sustainable. Just from today, from Indian Express, Lebanese in impoverished north protest coronavirus lockdown. Security forces responded with tear gas to break up the protesters who gathered in central Tripoli, despite a strict lockdown in place since mid-January, aimed at containing a major surge in infection in the small Mediterranean country. It is not, in my opinion, possible to maintain this. Maybe it's smart of American politicians to finally back down. Maybe it has something to do with Biden. Maybe it doesn't. But they can't contain this. People are losing it, and I understand that anger. Something must be done about this. Listen, when it came to the Black Lives Matter riots, I'm all in favor of police reform. Stop the violence, everybody, and let's have a conversation about what we can do to ease tensions. Now take a look at the coronavirus lockdowns. The riots are wrong, in my opinion, but how about we stop and we compromise to figure out how we move forward? Now, look, we're not Lebanon, we're not France, we're not Australia, we're not Israel, we're not Tunisia, we're not the Netherlands, I get it. But I think those countries are showing us what's going to happen if we keep doing this here. People are going to lose their minds, man. Now, if most of us, we live in to a certain degree of luxury. We do. Whether you realize it or not, America is pretty well off. So is Europe, to be honest. But we're starting to see these COVID restrictions eased up. And maybe that's a good thing, because if we get to that point where people become truly desperate, you don't want to see what happens in the country. You don't want to see what happens in a country where people are armed to the teeth and angry. It's one thing when they're throwing Molotovs and rocks. Mix in family working people who are desperate and acting in defiance, and you'll see what a real riot looks like. And that we don't want. So it's good that we're seeing the easing of restrictions here. Over in France, here's what I find interesting. We have students, teachers, and nurses protesting a lack of support during the pandemic. So they're not exactly protesting the lockdown. They're protesting that they deserve more support during the lockdown. In defiance of COVID restrictions, they come out in protests. We do have this one in Montclair, New Jersey, where parents, students protest the decision to keep classrooms closed. So not entirely just about general lockdown, but still a general lockdown protest. I probably should have moved this forward because I want to talk more about the left protesting in defiance of COVID rules. From BBC Australia Day, thousands defy COVID rules in Invasion Day protests. One thing we have seen, which I think kind of exemplifies the claim of civil war from the Eindhoven mayor, is that the left, while being the ones protesting for support and in favor of lockdowns, or at least not protesting the lockdowns themselves, they defy those lockdowns. It's the Democrats in the U.S. who are going out and partying and eating and ignoring the rules. And it is the left going out and protesting in defiance. Well, at least in Australia, they're arresting people. They say several people have been arrested for breaking COVID rules, protesting against the culturally sensitive Australia Day holiday. At least 5 arrests were made in Sydney at a rally attended by around 2,000 people, despite rules limiting the number allowed to gather at 500. You know, in the U.S., we have a right to free speech and assembly, so they don't have that in Australia. But I do think it's interesting to see the left defying the rules that typically the left supports. Not everyone, mind you. I understand the left is not a monolith, but they tend to act in concert on several issues. Notably this story. Brazil protests call for Bolsonaro's ouster amid COVID-19 crisis. They say Brazilian protesters took to the streets to call for Bolsonaro's impeachment as his administration faces criticism over a slow coronavirus vaccination rollout and a surging death toll from the pandemic. You don't get to criticize your leader for not doing a good enough job on COVID and then defying the recommendations and go out and protest. Okay, that's not necessarily fair. You get to protest your leaders no matter what. That's true. Fine. But please don't expect me to take you seriously when you advocate for these things and then you go out and protest and defy those same restrictions. Mind you, I'd like to see the leftists start demanding workers' rights. No, they demand government assistance. But what about the workers, the real working class Americans who are demanding the ability to support themselves and their families? I think it's funny when we see the left say, I just want you to have health care. Spare me, dude. People want to have choice. They want to decide for themselves. I was watching Star Trek the other day. It's a great episode. You've seen the Next Generation. I'm sure you know about it. Commander Riker, right? He's captured by these aliens. I'm not going to get too much into the Trekkie stuff, but no, this is a good point. He's watching them play basically 3D chess, and he keeps trying to tell the dude what moves to make, and the dude's getting annoyed. And I thought a second, and I was like, that's really annoying, right? If I'm playing a game of chess, I don't want someone telling me what to do. Let me lose. If I'm playing a game, I'm playing the game for the experience. If I'm living for the experience. Let me choose. So I see these leftists saying, we just want you to have health care. We want to ban private health care. It's like, dude, I'm not about that. I'm about supporting the rights of the individual worker. And the workers want to work to support themselves and feed their families. Now, a lot of them do want those stimulus checks. Trump supporters and Biden supporters agreed. Or anti-Trump people and pro-Trump people agreed. Get the checks out to give people relief. We're borrowing from ourselves and our kids, and it's a problem, but we all kind of agree, let's at least make this loan effort. Instead, what we do is we give the people barely any money, and then we print a ton of garbage money for massive corporations. That I can at least say the left and the right completely agree upon. But for those calling for more lockdowns, all you are doing is making people angry. People like to be responsible, to have purpose. You might not, but they do. And that's why this stuff doesn't work. And I can prove it. Take a look at this story. California Governor Gavin Newsom lifts virus stay-at-home orders. Wow. What could have prompted this? I mean, the data hasn't changed. Look at this. Governor Gavin Newsom said Monday the state's hospitalization rate was down nearly 20% statewide over the last 2 weeks. We're in a position projecting 4 weeks forward with a significant decline in the case rates, positivity rates. We are anticipating decline, still more decline in hospitalizations and more declines in ICUs. Oh, is that true? Well, okay, fine. If that's the case and things are getting better, then maybe these easing of restrictions make sense. CBS goes on to say the decision comes with improving trends in the rate of infections, hospitalizations, and intensive care unit capacity, as well as vaccinations. Sure, okay, I'll accept that. That's a fair point. Many people have countered and said that's not the case, and the overall rate across the country isn't really changing all that much. But we are seeing now some statements that they believe it's plateaued at the very least. I think there's a real reason for this. Ladies and gentlemen, recallgavin2020.com. More than 1.2 million signed petitions. Governor Gavin Newsom continues to destroy the lives and businesses of hardworking Californians. Help stop this tyrant before it's too late. The interesting thing, the left hates the man too. So I don't think he's going to make it through this one unscathed. Well, to be fair, the U.S. is seeing restrictions be eased across the board. This is good news. It is. Look, you can think they're duplicitous. You can think they're liars and manipulators, but at least something good is happening, right? I've long complained with the lockdowns being ineffective. They should have been more surgical. And I think the Democrats were playing politics. But I'll still be happy a good thing is happening. Bloomberg reports U.S. states ease COVID restrictions as variants take hold. You see, that's the interesting thing. When California, when they're saying, oh, but things are getting better. Didn't Joe Biden just institute a new travel ban on South Africa and European nations because of the new variant, the UK strain and the South Africa strain? Yes. But for some reason in the U.S., they're easing restrictions. That's why everybody thinks it's political, because there's good reason to actually increase the restrictions. But maybe now that Joe Biden is in, they feel it's safe to avoid the bigger catastrophe, riots and unrest. Bloomberg says California and other large states are loosening COVID restrictions, just as scientists warn that more contagious variants of the virus are beginning to take hold in the U.S. and the vaccine rollout struggles. They say California Governor Gavin Newsom lifting the stay-at-home order, New York, Illinois, Michigan, and Massachusetts also are easing restrictions. The shift comes as new COVID-19 cases and hospitalizations are declining. Still, the new variants, including the one in UK, another in California and Brazil, and a Brazilian one first identified in the U.S. on Monday in Minnesota, are setting off alarms and may be more transmissible. The U.S. has administered only about 23.4 million vaccines for a population of about 331 million. This is why I lean towards it being political. Joe Biden's president. The inauguration is done. Trump is out. He calls himself the former president. Okay, ease the restrictions. Why? Because they don't care about you, and they never did. I never believed for a minute the lockdowns, the true intention was to help save people. It was political because they don't care. They watched people suffer. They watched suicide rates spike. People's businesses get destroyed, their lives destroyed, their dreams destroyed, and they didn't care, no matter what the data said. When the World Health Organization top scientists came out and said lockdowns should be avoided and we can't avoid them, they said, we don't care. Now, I can't speak for Europe. I can speak for the U.S. to a certain degree. Now that it's safe to do so, they're going to ease restrictions. And it might actually be a bad thing for everybody. Why? What I've long said is we need a surgical response to this, not a blanket reopening or a blanket closing. I just don't think they care. By maximizing reopening, they're going to see their tax revenues come back and they're going to fluff up their budgets. Doing a complete lockdown was good politically, and it absolved them of any responsibility and real leadership responsibility. And they did it because they could just blame Trump for all the turmoil. Now they're reopening. And when people start suffering, they'll probably still just blame Trump and say, if Trump had done the right thing, this wouldn't be happening. Well, at the very least, I can say the easing of restrictions is better than the mass lockdowns. And at this point, I would rather have a completely open economy where you are responsible for your health than a completely closed down one where no one can do anything. When people sit inside their homes, they wither. You need to get out in the sunlight. You need that vitamin D. You need to be physically active. And people in big cities were just withering away. I read one horrifying story talking about how people have deteriorated. Their health is just miserable. They're out of shape. People had bad blood levels or whatever, triglycerides, just becoming out of shape. And it was getting bad. Vitamin D was a big thing because that's making people sick. You need to be active. So easing the restrictions makes a lot of sense for younger people, not to mention the suicide rate was skyrocketing, and that was horrifying. The starvation that we've already seen, the UN warned about this. I can't stand these politicians, to be completely honest. I think they're duplicitous. I think they don't actually care about anybody. And I think if they maintain these lockdowns, it would get substantially worse. And that's probably what's happening. In the U.S., many are probably realizing, one, it's safe to do so now, but also they've reached the barrier. They've reached as far as they can go before people are going to start snapping and getting angry and going nuts like they are in Europe. In Europe, apparently they're not learning their lesson. And they would just rather watch it all burn in mass riots than just ease the restrictions. What's the worst that's going to happen? We've seen what the potential death rate's going to be. And it's horrifying. Even one death is too much. But let's be real. Let's be adults. The world is not perfect. The world is not fair. And sometimes people die. We don't want them to. Come on. But sometimes people die. I mean, to be honest, everyone dies. Unless, of course, there's some evil billionaire who's perfected immortality or something. But no, in reality, we're all going to die. Now, we don't want to die in an untimely way. But we can't control nature. Okay? What do they say? They say the wet markets, they were selling this stuff and these diseases. It's not the first time it's happened in China. I know you've got that New York Mag story about that the lab leak hypothesis, but let me just tell you something. Maybe, but it's not surprising to me if you're like a bunch of people have a bunch of crazy wild animals and they're selling them in a dirty area, because there have been numerous stories of the past decades, 100 years, even more, of these diseases emerging in China. There's a story of gutter oil where people in China were pulling up sewage and then sifting out the oil to reuse gutter oil. So when you tell me that, look, man, these things happen. They say the Spanish flu may have originally started in China as a weaker strain. And then when it came to Europe in the trenches of World War I, it got worse and then made its way to the U.S. Maybe. I'm not trying to rag on China. I'm just saying sometimes these things emerge due to bad, hygiene and sanitation. And we have to realize that we can't save everyone. We can try, but locking down the world is resulting in chaos. I think we in the U.S. may be on the back end of things, so that's that's good. And hopefully things start to improve, and I hope we can save as many lives as possible. For the time being, the COVID mortality rate is like 99.99% for people under the age of 70. So, it's not as bad as they're saying. Let's get people back to work and let's save these businesses that were destroyed. The damage has been done already. The largest transfer of wealth in the history of the world has already occurred. And they're making off like bandits. I don't know what to tell you guys. I hope the Netherlands is okay. I hope these countries figure out a way to get through this. And I hope people make it through. But, You got some nasty people running some of these countries. I'll leave it there. Next segment is coming up tonight live at youtube.com/TimcastIRL. Check it out, hang out, and if you want exclusive segments only for our members, go to timcast.com, become a member to help support our network. And we're going to be expanding, doing a lot more content, going to be a lot of fun. So it's greatly appreciated. Thanks for hanging out, and I will see you all tonight at 8 p.m.